Welcome to Punctuation and Grammar video number 1. In this video, we're going to be covering sentences. You may want to review the basic parts of speech. These are a prerequisite for the course, so we're not going to be spending any time on them. If these terms seem unfamiliar to you, make sure you review them. Let's start off by defining a complete sentence. A complete sentence concludes something. It is a statement that comes across as complete and clear. Each complete sentence will have a subject and a verb. Let's take a look at two examples. The carnival is exciting, period. We can see that this does conclude something about the carnival. The carnival is our subject, and it is exciting. We have the verb is here. This is a linking verb. If you're not used to seeing linking verbs, the best way to identify them is to replace them with an equal sign. The carnival equals exciting. The last example is the carny sells corn dogs. We have someone doing something. The carny being our subject, selling corn dogs. Sells being our action verb in this case. Let's take a look at the simple sentence. We know that each sentence has a subject and a verb, but a sentence also will have a predicate. A predicate is simply what comes after the subject. It's quite an easy term. There's going to be a subject, and there's going to be something about that subject. It's just that simple. So let's take a look at an example. Students should spend less time in the pub and more time in the library. Can you spot the subject? If you said students, you're correct. The predicate is everything that comes afterward. Okay, so we have students and something about them. Well, they should spend less time in the pub and more time in the library. Let's take a look at 3 example sentences. Can you identify the subject and the predicate in each sentence? In the first sentence, we have the toothless cat. It is important to include the adjective because it's a very specific cat that we are talking about. It's a toothless one. And what about that cat? Well, it won't eat anything but canned cat food. The next example we have, the bomb exploded. The bomb being the subject, okay, and exploded being just a verb, but it also functions as a predicate. And our final example here, my arm has a bruise. We have my arm, okay, being that noun or the subject. And what about my arm? Well, it has a bruise. Now that we've looked at complete sentences, let's look at the opposite, the sentence fragment. A sentence fragment is a dwindling piece of sentence. In other words, it's not a complete sentence. Fragments are generally a subject without a predicate or a predicate without a subject. Let's take a look at 3 examples. The houses on the street. Is that a subject? Is it a predicate? Or is it both? Is it a complete sentence? Hopefully you answered no. The houses on the street is simply a subject. We need to know something about the houses on the street. Therefore, this one would be a fragment. Found a book to read. Hopefully this one sounds awkward to you. What is it missing? It's missing the subject. We could simply put I at the beginning of this and it would be a complete sentence. I found a book to read. The last one, the crafty thief. Is that a subject, a predicate, or a complete sentence? This one, once again, is the subject of the sentence. The crafty thief, well, what about the crafty thief? All 3 of these are fragments. Now that we understand what a complete sentence is and what a fragment is, let's look at the construction of sentences. Clauses are the building blocks of sentences, and when we understand the 2 different types of clauses, we will be able to better understand punctuation. A clause is an expression including a subject and a predicate, but it does not constitute a complete sentence. Now there are 2 types. Independent clauses can stand on their own as a sentence if we were to pull them out of the sentence. So they are independent. They can function on their own. Dependent clauses are the opposite. They cannot stand alone as a complete sentence, as they are dependent on something else. This also means that dependent clauses are a type of fragment. To understand the difference between the two clauses, we need to understand what subordinating conjunctions are. Subordinating conjunctions are words that turn an independent clause into a dependent clause. These subordinating conjunctions are always placed at the beginning of the clause. Let's take a look at an example. Although Betty wears a helmet. Is this a complete sentence? When you say it out loud, is it a complete thought? Although Betty wears a helmet. It kind of leaves you hanging, doesn't it? Can you identify the subordinating conjunction in this fragment? How do you think we can correct this problem? Let's take a look at a possible correction. Although Betty wears a helmet, she only wears it for style. Can you tell what type of clauses we have here? Although Betty wears a helmet is a dependent clause because we have a subordinating conjunction at the beginning. If we get rid of the subordinating conjunction, we're left with Betty wears a helmet, which could stand on its own as a complete sentence. This is how we can identify this dependent clause. After the dependent clause, we have she only wears it for style, meaning she only wears the helmet for style. This could stand on its own as a complete sentence. So we've added an independent clause after the dependent clause, so we have a complete sentence in the end. Down here we have Betty wears a helmet, period. She only wears it for style, period. Here we have an independent clause followed by another independent clause, and actually they are functioning as complete sentences because we have a period between them. Now I'd like you to pause this video for a moment. Take some time to identify the subordinating conjunctions and the different clause types in the three sentences I have for you here. If you're having trouble identifying what I've asked you to, go back and start the video over again and review the topics that we've covered. Okay, let's take a look at the answers. Identifying the subordinating conjunctions, we're looking for those words at the beginning of clauses, usually the first clause, and we're looking for words that create that questioning state. So here we have if I find my keys, because the couch is on fire, before you purchased that case of beer. Each one of these clauses creates that questioning state. We need something else to be stated. Let's take a look at the dependent clauses in these examples. If I find my keys, because the couch is on fire, before you purchased that case of beer. Once again, questioning states in each case. Let's take a look at the independent clauses, and maybe I can discuss a rule now. Every single sentence needs to have an independent clause inside of it somewhere. And that should make sense to you because an independent clause is in fact a complete sentence on its own. So we have, I will be able to get to work. I think I will lie down upstairs. You should have considered the consequences of having too much fun. As you can see, each of these are complete thoughts that conclude something. They are clear, therefore independent clauses. Now that we've seen simple sentences and sentences that contain independent clauses and dependent clauses, let's take a look at sentences that contain two independent clauses. In other words, two sentences. One way that we can join two sentences or two independent clauses together is coordinating conjunctions. Coordinating conjunctions, instead of creating a subordinate dependent clause, they join two independent clauses. It's an excellent way to eliminate comma splices and run-on sentences. An easy way to remember coordinating conjunctions is to repeat these words over and over again until you have them memorized. And, but, or, for, nor, yet, so. And, but, or, for, nor, yet, so. And, but, or, for, nor, yet, so. I know you've hardly been exposed to the coordinating conjunctions up to this point, but I'd like you to pause the video and try to identify the coordinating conjunctions in these sentences. Remember that they will always come between or join independent clauses. So what you're looking for are independent clauses, and you should see the coordinating conjunction in between. Okay, let's take a look at the answers. When we're looking for coordinating conjunctions, we're looking for independent clauses. So let's take a look at this first example. I like singing in the shower. Can that work on its own as a sentence? It sure can. Let's look on the other side of the sentence. I sound like a dying fish. Can that work on its own? It can. So we can see that this coordinating conjunction is being used correctly. Remember that it will always need a comma, okay, if it's being used to separate or join independent clauses. So when we read this, I like singing in the shower, but I sound like a dying fish. It sounds clear. We're going to jump down to the third example here. It uses a coordinating conjunction that can be a little bit confusing. The word nor. And, but, or, for, nor, yet, so. The first independent clause you'll see is quite clear. She cannot remember where she put her pet ostrich. Period. That's okay. The second one can be a little confusing when we're using nor. Can she remember where she put its leash? Does that make much sense? It doesn't sound very complete. The trick when using nor is to imagine that the second clause is a question. We want to imagine that there's a question mark right here. Can she remember where she put its leash? Suddenly it makes sense, and nor is being used correctly here. Here we have everything broken down for you. In blue, we have independent clauses. In purple, we have independent clauses. And in green, we have our coordinating conjunctions. Let's move on to some common errors made when we're joining independent clauses. A comma splice is where we have two independent clauses with a comma in between them. Let's look at an example. I dreamt about being abducted by aliens last night. I cannot remember the details. This comma is incorrect because we can never place a comma where a period could go. And the reason we can place a period here is because we have independent clauses on either side. I dreamt about being abducted by aliens last night. Period. I cannot remember the details. Period. Therefore, this comma is incorrect. Now, how can we correct this comma splice using a coordinating conjunction? We already have the comma that would come before the coordinating conjunction. Which one would work well here? We have the list and, but, or, for, nor, yet, so. My answer is but. I dreamt about being abducted by aliens last night, comma, but I cannot remember the details. Run-on sentences are pretty easy to learn if you understood comma splices. They are simply a comma splice without the comma. Let's take a look at an example. My psychiatrist thinks that I was dreaming. I think the aliens abducted me. If we read this without the pause that I added, you'll see that it's quite awkward. My psychiatrist thinks that I was dreaming. I think the aliens abducted me. Hopefully you can feel that there's a problem area, and this is where the two clauses are not joined by any punctuation. How can we correct this? Let's look at some examples. The most simple method to correct comma splices and run-on sentences would be to place a period between the independent clauses, thus creating two simple sentences. We can also place a semicolon in the same place. My psychiatrist thinks that I was dreaming. I think the aliens abducted me. This is correct usage of the semicolon, and we'll be covering more about semicolons later on. There are a couple other ways that we can use to correct a comma splice or a run-on sentence. One of them we've already used, but we just haven't looked at it in this certain context. We can use a subordinating conjunction to make the first clause dependent, which would also make this comma here legal. Do you remember subordinating conjunctions? They create that questioning state. Although is one of them. Although my psychiatrist thinks I was dreaming, I think the aliens abducted me. This comma would be okay. If we get rid of this subordinating conjunction, we'd be left with a comma splice. We can also reduce one of the independent clauses to a fragment or a single word. In this case, we're going to do so with a fragment. Let's read what's in blue first. I think that aliens abducted me. This is the core meaning of the sentence that we're writing, and this could stand on its own. What we have surrounded by commas here is a fragment or an aside, something that we want to make less important. We're also stating that it can be removed from the sentence, and the sentence will still have its core meaning. So when we read something like this, we read it like, I think, against the beliefs of my psychiatrist, that aliens abducted me. Now I'd like you to pause the video for as long as it takes for you to get through these 3 examples. I'd like you to first identify the errors that are present in these sentences, and then I'd like you to correct them as many ways as you think that you can. Let's take a look at the answers. When we're identifying clauses, we're looking for the 2 types, dependent and independent. When we notice a subordinating conjunction at the beginning of a sentence, we're likely going to have a dependent clause. Because you are a rookie leaves us hanging. We do have a subordinating conjunction, and we do have an independent clause hidden inside of it. You are a rookie. So therefore, we have a dependent clause starting off this sentence. In purple, we have an independent clause. You may make mistakes when punctuating sentences. We'll look at the punctuation in the next slide. The next example we have here, it has been proven that juggling while driving is a distraction. This can function as a sentence on its own, therefore, it is an independent clause. On the other side of the sentence, we have, please avoid being silly at the wheel. This is actually an independent clause as well, so we know that we have 2 independent clauses in this sentence. In our last example, we have, Belinda is from Coaldale, which is an independent clause. Frederick is from Colehurst, which is also an independent clause. All right, let's add the punctuation. We know this first example begins with a dependent clause. Dependent clauses are a type of fragment, and one thing I'd like you to remember, something that we'll cover more so in future presentations, is that commas always are needed if we're going to start a sentence with a fragment of any kind. And we know dependent clauses are a type of fragment. So this sentence is now correct once we add this comma in. Because you are a rookie, comma, you may make mistakes when punctuating sentences. We have a dependent clause with a comma and followed by an independent clause. The next example, we start off with an independent clause and we end with an independent clause. So we know that we could put a period here, and we know that we can't just have a comma. In this case, we have the word so. It is very possible that this is functioning as a coordinating conjunction, and, but, or, for, nor, yet, so. So the way to check this is we're looking for independent clauses on either side, and we know that this is happening. So this is functioning correctly. It has been proven that juggling while driving is a distraction, comma, so please avoid being silly at the wheel. Our last example, we have 2 short independent clauses. Belinda is from Coaldale, Frederick is from Colehurst. Originally, we just had a comma here, which would be a comma splice. What I have done for my answer is added a coordinating conjunction, and, but, or, for, nor, yet, so. So therefore, this one is functioning correctly, the same as our second example is. That wraps up our first punctuation video. Make sure that you rewatch this video if any of the concepts are unclear.